Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett called out some Republicans for trying to shut the government down, as if citizens don't have a lot to deal with on their plate.
Do either one of you know the definition of insanity?
I think you're referring to doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result.
Oh, okay. That's exactly what I was referring to, and it sounds like that is what this party is good at. My colleagues on the other side of the aisle wanted to call this hearing, this is not our first, it's not our second. I've actually lost count myself of how many IRS hearings we're having, and they seemingly feel like they can fix your very complicated issues, but somehow they aren't good at simple math that would get them to a speaker. There was a looming government shutdown a few weeks ago, and interestingly enough, when I do the math, approximately a little bit more than 60% of the people that sit on this committee actually voted to shut us down. Now, out of curiosity, for everyone that claims to care about their constituents, do you think it's easier or more difficult to operate as the IRS when, say, there's a shutdown?
It is very disruptive.
We are going to revisit again in March. Hopefully, the government doesn't shut down come March, but we need to be familiarized with what's going on with this government shutdown that is looming again come March, shortly in the near future. So we need to know what it's all about. Here's NBC giving us a brief recap as to what the government shutdown is all about.
Congressional leaders from both parties have reached a short-term spending deal to keep the government open until March. The deal comes just in time. Some parts of the government were set to run out of money this upcoming Friday. NBC News congressional correspondent Julie Circuit joins us now with more on this. So, Julie, what are we learning about the deal?
Yeah, hey, Joe, good morning. Well, this is going to be structured effectively the same as that last stopgap government funding measure that took us into these two deadlines, the first of which you point out coming this Friday. So basically that moves that deadline, January 19th, to March 1st, and then it moves the second deadline that would have been hit February 2nd.
Now, over the years, I know a lot of you heard the term stopgap. Well, this is what it means.
Here's the definition of stopgap: a temporary way of dealing with a problem or satisfying a need.
If you're coming onto the page, kindly hit that like bell for me, the thumbs up bell, and subscribe if you haven't done so as yet. Thank you. Now let's continue.
This Friday, so basically that moves that deadline, January 19th, to March 1st, and then it moves the second deadline that would have been hit February 2nd down to March 8th. That's keeping that structure intact because some of those hardline conservatives in the House took Johnson at his word that he would not pass another short-term spending bill. They are nervous that the Senate, led by Democrats, could jam them with a big omnibus spending package. They want to make sure that House conservatives know they're still going to pass these items in two different buckets. So this is good news, averting that deadline potentially coming up at the end of the week, but they still have to get an agreement to pass it in the Senate and the House, and that inclement weather will certainly make that tricky with lawmakers set to return tomorrow night, Joe.
Yeah, so Speaker Johnson held a call last night with House Republicans to discuss the negotiations. Do we at this point have any indication on whether he'll have the votes needed from his own party to get this passed before Friday's deadline?
Joe, there were certainly a lot of voices, a lot of opinions raised on this call last night. Sources told me that Johnson did take a lot of incoming from Republicans who, again, are frustrated that he is continuing to go in this direction. He is following what his predecessor, Kevin McCarthy, had done in trying to keep the government open. And certainly this is going to be something to watch for Johnson. He's going to have to reach across the aisle. Unfortunately, the map just does not cut it for him. He has a very, very tight margin, even more so with one lawmaker, for example, getting into a car accident this weekend. Now he's going to be out. Johnson announced that at the call yesterday. He's going to need Democrats to pass this along. It's going to be passed under what's called a suspension of rules. That means it's going to go straight to the floor, requiring 2/3 of the House. That means a lot of Democratic votes to get it across the finish line. Good news for them, though. Hakeem Jeffries, leader of Democrats in the House, had released a statement yesterday encouraging his members to vote in favor of this to avert that government shutdown on Friday. But certainly that's just going to mean more heat on Johnson from conservatives.
You mentioned the previous speaker, Kevin McCarthy. He faced similar inter-party clashes on government spending, and that is what ultimately cost him the gavel. So here's the question. Could we see a repeat? What are the challenges Johnson's facing right now?
Remember, this stopgap stopgap funding bill just gives them more time to process the full year spending agreements, keeping those in those two buckets that I talked about. But that just means that he's also going to need Democrats to vote to pass that top line spending bill, $1.6 trillion. They're going to divide them up. They're going to pass them in a series of bills. But we already heard from a lot of conservatives last week saying they're going to vote against it. They want Johnson, for example, to pair it with H.R. 2 with border security. He said, no way, that's not happening, keeping that link with Ukraine instead. But he's going to have to rely across the aisle. And like you mentioned, Kevin McCarthy had to do that, and it cost him his job. So far, though, Joe, people are willing to give him a chance. I spoke to a handful of conservatives on Friday, for example. While they are criticizing Johnson, they say they're not willing to go as far as to threaten his job just yet. We'll see what happens as the months continue. But we also ended Friday with Johnson saying he's going to keep that top line agreement intact. He's not going to go away from it, and certainly that's going to anger conservatives.
All right, Julie Sirkin. Julie, thank you so much.
So the government did not shut down on Friday and everything is running smoothly, but we're going to see what happens come March.
According to Congressman Dan Kildee, House.gov, a shutdown could delay major infrastructure projects due to a delay in federal reviews, including projects to modernize utilities in rural communities and improve our interstate highways, which federal employees keep working during a government shutdown.
So pretty much a shutdown really affects infrastructure. Some examples of infrastructure are transportation. So imagine getting up to get on the bus, get on a train, and there's no service or limited service when you have to get to work. Airports, same thing. You have to get a flight out and there's limited service. Recreation, transportation systems, everything affects us during a government shutdown. In other words, utility lines, etc. However, it does not affect Social Security nor disability checks. And since this is tax season, it would not have affected the returns of your taxes, because I know a lot of people worry about that. Anytime a government shutdown is looming, people get very concerned about those checks coming in.
According to OPM, employees not required to work are furloughed, that is, placed in a non-pay, non-duty status until the shutdown ends. Will accepted employees get paid? Employees designated accepted who continue to work during the shutdown will almost certainly be paid for this period.
So pretty much during a shutdown, if it's required for you to work, you're going to get paid. But most people who work with the government during that time go on furlough. That means you stay home without pay until the government reopens.
According to About USPS Home, USPS, Postal Service not affected by a government shutdown. U.S. Postal Service operations will not be interrupted in the event of a government shutdown, and all post offices will remain open for business as usual. News. Social Security is considered a mandatory program, and it isn't funded by the shorter-term appropriations bills passed by Congress and signed by the President. That means its operations and funding don't stop when the government shuts down. According to CNET, typically, the Social Security Administration disperses SSI checks on the first of each month. However, there are a couple of exceptions to the payment schedule. According to Young, Marr & Associates, benefits will be sent without interruption. According to the Social Security Administration site outlining the effects of the shutdown, according to Young, Marr & Associates, what does the government shutdown mean for SSI, SSDI? The good news up front, individuals receiving Social Security and Supplemental Security income as well as those receiving Social Security disability insurance will continue to receive benefits with no change in payment dates. According to Committee for a Responsible Federal Budget, in a shutdown, federal agencies must discontinue all non-essential discretionary functions until new funding legislation is passed and signed into law. Essential services continue to function, as do mandatory spending programs. Energy, transportation, and housing and urban development is maintained through March 1st. According to AFGE, January 22, 2024, the Senate and House last week passed a two-tiered funding measure that keeps federal agencies running through March 1st and March 8th. Funding for departments of Veterans Affairs, Agriculture, Energy, Transportation, and Housing and Urban Development is maintained through March 1st.
As you come onto the page, don't forget to hit that thumbs up bell and subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so as yet. Thank you very much.
Congressional leaders from both parties have reached a short-term spending deal to keep the government open until March.
If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to hit that like bell before you leave the page. On that note, I'm over and out. I'll see you guys on the next one. Thank you for watching.